I am Sam.
How are you doing, guys? It's Gavin here again from Hologram Productions.
Hey, Paul!
And today I've set myself a bit of a challenge, which is that I'm going to attempt to make the music of Floating Points, specifically from his album Crush, but without any gear and entirely in Ableton. So the track we're focusing on is a track called Anasickmodular. I think that's how you pronounce it. Oh, there's the name floating around all visual. The track kind of exists in its own genre, kind of electro, breakbeat, modular loveliness. And I'm going to attempt to recreate it just through careful sample selection and placement. So if you listen to the track, the kind of details that we're going to need to include would be these low toms for kicks, really crisp shakers, tambourines which are quite loose in their playing, various different claps, not just one. I'm going to have to steal some buckler easel samples for those bleepy sounds. I'm going to attempt to make the pad from resampled tape samples, and we need to also create a gated pad. Look at that beautiful waveform. I'll need to figure out how to use an awful lot of Ableton effects in order to create all of these cool looping sounds. But before we jump in, let's have a quick masterclass on the buckle ESO system by Floating Points.
And so this section of this this is that we can what's called a and this is basically and so which are kind of there's some rolls and trying to get my head around it, but the principle of
Okay, so taking all of that advice on board, let's jump into Ableton and make some drums. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a drum rack. I'm going to throw multiple individual kick hits in there to start with. So I'm selecting them very carefully and I'm throwing them in. Then we're going to do the same thing for shakers. Find just a selection of individual hits, but also loops that we're going to use in the track. And now a selection of mid-toms, which we're going to throw into the rack. And a selection of 2 or 3 claps. But we're also going to need to try and recreate the sounds from the buckler ESO system, but you can't do that. So I've been lazy and I went and I recorded a whole bunch of samples from a friend with an Arturia rack. And there's loads of cool bleepy individual transients that you can use. Listen to all of them. Bleepy and zeepy and blappy. And I'm going to find individual hits which I think will work. Throw multiple instances of this into the drum rack, and afterwards I'm going to find individual transients that we can use for the bleeps. I'm now going to create some macros. I'm going to add the start button to the macro and then map to all siblings. Then the length button to macro 2 and map to all siblings. Then the transpose button to macro 3 and map to all siblings. And then I'm going to combine the sustain and decay to macro 4 and map to all siblings. So you can basically control all of the individual samples with all of these macros. Oh yeah, and of course the release and map to all siblings. On the audio effects rack, I want some glue with conservative settings to begin with. We'll manipulate these afterwards as we need. The saturator, -6 on the output, +8 on the drive. Give it some crunch. And an EQ weight. Also, in a return channel, we want a reverb so we can throw the entire drum rack into the reverb. Then throw in every beat repeat preset that is available, minimize them, and then throw in an echo. Make sure the beat repeats and echoes are before the glue, saturation, and EQ on the audio rack. And now we're going to group all of them and map the device on-off button to each in the individual macros. So there's going to be about 16 of these on-off switches. And for the echo, you're going to map the dry-wet and also the rate. So now let's work on the MIDI placement for the drums. I'm trying to recreate the hits from the actual track. Doom, 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 doom. But we don't want the transients of the kicks, so you go to the start button on the macros and you just turn it forward and you're left with the popping bass. That's the key to the sound. Then I added a collection of claps. I'm just starting off with 2 for now. They both hit at slightly different times. I move some of them back and forward just a little bit, so there's a little bit of movement. So together they sound pretty good. Now for the mid-toms, each are hitting on the offbeat in order to fill out the groove. That one long MIDI line is just a loop. It's a really good tambourine loop, which I felt had a nice loose quality to it. And there's a few more Woody and Tom hits. I'll just fast forward past this bit because I want to get to the buckler easel sample section. Basically fill out the groove. So now for the buckler easel hits, I scanned through to find hits which sounded vaguely similar to the ones in the original track. Thought that sounded good. That one also sounded really sharp. So then you go into the MIDI and place them correctly on the offbeat. So it kind of sounds like a cheaper version of the original, but it's still placed correctly. I want to put a few more shaker and tambourine hits to hit at the same time as the clap, just to make the clap more sustained, I suppose. But I'm going to go with these individual shaker hits and just push the start time forward so they're more crisp. And then you throw some reverb into the return. And it's not sounding bad. It's crap in comparison to the actual buckler easel system, but it is not bad. So now let's play around the beat repeats. Get some randomness going on. You can also manipulate the transposition. That's cool. Now check out this beat repeat preset here called Reboot. Now this is basically a version of Deconstruct, which I tweaked. I just had to go into some of the settings to change them to make it sound like the machine is glitching out and stopping, which Floating Points used a lot on his Printworks live set. And playing around with the echo, dry, wet and the rate gives you these really cool funky sounds. Again, great for live performing. As I've mentioned in my previous videos, there are many ways to support my channel if you like it. You can contact me on this email address if you're interested in a one-on-one lesson or a personal tutorial, and I advise you to do so straight away. But I should also give a shout out to all of those lovely people who have been leaving me really supportive comments in the comments section on the YouTube channel. And I have to say, some of them have been really sweet and they really do mean a lot. So much love, guys. Okay, so now let's try to make the pads. Again, the key to getting music like this right in the box is good sample selection. So I've gone for vinyl samples from Mars, which is available on Splice. And I quite liked this tape saw sound, so I put it into simpler, activated the loop function, make sure the sample is not warped, and then increase the start time. And now you can play this individual sample like a pad. Make sure they're like 24 voices. And now increase the attack and release. I'm going to use multiband dynamics to compress the mid, because this sound can get quite woody if you don't control it. Also control it with some glue. Again, starting with conservative settings, but you may need to tweak these afterwards. The EQ, let's just very gently bring down the mids, and then throw it through a hybrid reverb. Now the MIDI notes are F, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, F, F, G sharp, A sharp, C, F. And then, well, look, I mean, you're looking at the screen, you can see the notes, just copy them, you'll be grand. The notes are also stepping up gradually to give the music a sense of escalation, and it's like opening up, which happens in the second half of the track. So you can also open up the filter gradually to allow the highs to come through. And with the drums, so let's make a second pad, which is more mid. Another sine sample, again I got from Vinyl Samples from Mars, and I'm looping the end section. This one needs a lot of compression on the mids, as you can see in the multiband dynamics. A lot of compression on the glue, and then you can throw out the reverb, and then you can use the EQ to make sure that the mids don't spike too high. Sometimes, instead of using wavetable or operator pad presets, it's better to make your own pad in simpler by throwing in your own samples. Now let's make a gated pad, which is what Floating Points used in the live performed version of this track. I froze and flattened an instance of the first pad into an audio sample. And for the gate to work, we need to activate it using a side chain. So this operator loop is going to be used for the side chain. So I drew in a groove. The melody doesn't matter, it's just the placement. Then you turn on the gate, activate the side chain, play around with the threshold, the attack and the hold, and then you get this kind of sound. And now add some drum bus to thicken it and then run it through a reverb. And now you got your gated pad. A second way of doing this would be to do it in simpler. So take the MIDI, which we used for the gate, and then you throw the sample into slice in simpler. And we're going to have all of the MIDI hits escalate all of the way up in order to be able to hit all of the individual hits in the region. Play around with the fade in and fade out. Again with the drum bus and the reverb. Okay, so now let's have some fun. Let's play the pad and let's play around with the macros. Playing around with the echo, playing around with the transposition, the attack time, the sample length, the transposition. So you can play this for hours and create your own sounds. Incidentally, as always, the sample pack is available on my Bandcamp, so go there and buy it. Okay, crazy visual time. Cool. I mean, that is literally hours of fun right there. To be perfectly clear, I am aware that this is nowhere near as good as the original, and by quite some distance, but nevertheless, I do hope that this inspires you to reapply the same techniques and make your own kind of sound. So as usual, guys, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.